Good morning or good afternoon, wherever you're calling from. Good evening. Welcome. Please type in the chat where you're joining from today and how many people are watching with you. And if you are able, the native land which you occupy. And if you're a host from an in-person site, feel free to chat a single check-in from where you are and how many are in the room. Also, host, if you wish, ask audience members to shout out where they came from, and you can chat it into the stream here. Love to see this room fill up with your voices. Let us know. I already see Liz, an early check-in from Westchester, just her. Anybody else? Let us know. We'd love this room to be filled with your voices so we know who's here. Once again, if you're just joining us, type in the chat where you're joining from today, how many are watching with you, and if you're able, the native land which you occupy. Great. We have Sherry from Naperville. Just Sherry. Wonderful. Thanks. Janice. Great. Wonderful. Wonderful. Talking about a story about monarch butterflies and how they live about 9 months. This is wonderful. Everybody check that out. I'm going to go on to others' check-ins. So Donna from Geneva, welcome. Rouge W2 Oak Park, Jim Babcock Oak Park, Donna Marie in Austin, Texas, welcome. Kala in San Francisco, Ohlone Land. Elaine from Evanston, Karen in Chicago, Don in Chicago, Amy from Chicago, the Council of the Three Fires, Odawa, Ojibwe, and Potawatomi, Ayubowan, Kay, Michael in Chicago, thank you. Michael in New Jersey, Lauren in Austin, Texas, Bethany in Vermont, Susan in River Grove. Wonderful. This is great. Let's keep checking on in so we can be introduced, if you will, to one another. And I'll keep us rolling as that happens. So I'm Anna Garcia Doyle, the Executive Director of One Earth Collective, which produces the One Earth Film Festival. We welcome you to this festival screening event, and we hope it'll provide us all with rich opportunities for learning, a brave and safe space for important conversations, and a way to move from inspiration to action. We couldn't do this work without the support of our sponsors and partners. So a big thank you to Navy Pier, to the Field Museum, the Walter S. Mander Foundation, the Village of Oak Park, and Ailey Solar. If your circumstances allow, please do donate to support One Earth's nonprofit year-round screening events, youth programs, and more at oneearthfilmfest.org.
We gratefully welcome you to One Earth's 11th festival season, and we invite you to join us in turning the tide on our climate crisis. The festival uses the power of film to create a sea change on topics of environment and those intersected with environment, like racial, social, and economic justice. This year, we've adapted a hybrid format where all screenings are virtual, with some accompanying in-person events taking place in the Chicago area. Whether live or virtual, we remain committed to our unique model of gathering and community to raise awareness of the issues, engage in dialogue, and be inspired to act. A powerful image and call to collective action in light of this year's festival theme, Turn the Tide, are the words of Japanese writer Ryanosuke Satoru. Individually, we are one drop. Together, we are an ocean. Our event will take place in 4 parts. Soon, we'll introduce you to some folks who will help us have a rich discussion after the film. Then, we'll watch the film together. After the film, we'll unpack its themes in a facilitated dialogue with our panelists. Please use the chat to share your thoughts, ideas, or questions. We'll end by sharing concrete actions you can take to be part of the solution. These suggested actions come from our panelists and action partners. I'd now like to make a few brief acknowledgments. The first is that as we reframe narratives around justice, environment, and equitable solutions to our climate crisis, we acknowledge the many filmmakers, film subjects, facilitators, and panelists joining this and other fest events. Thank you. Your wisdom and experiences help us spark and sustain actions for the protection of our One Earth and for the just treatment of its resources and its people. The second acknowledgement is that One Earth Collective is based in Chicago, the traditional homelands of the Council of the Three Fires, the Odawa, Ojibwe, and Potawatomi nations, and home to many other tribes, including today, peoples from over 100 tribal nations, Despite this, there are currently no federally recognized tribes in Illinois, due in part to colonization, relocation, and genocide. One Earth sustains its commitment to presenting films that center Indigenous stories and voices. We believe that beyond acknowledging the native lands we each occupy, we must lift up Indigenous voices and support the work of First Nations groups. If you're in the Chicago area, please support the important work being done by the American Indian Center Chicago, the Chicago American Indian Community Collaborative, Chi Nations Youth Council, and others. And watch for the Field Museum exhibition Native Truths, Our Voices, Our Stories, co-curated with collaborators from more than 100 tribes, opening this May. A third acknowledgement is that shared agreements can help keep our conversations safe and respectful. Please observe the following agreements when participating. Put aside your preconceptions, acknowledge your privilege, internalize what you've learned, approach the conversation with respect, engage your active listening, use I statements, and get comfortable with your own story. One last thing before we meet our facilitator and program participants. If you're active on social media, tell people that this is happening. Amplify these voices and be a part of the community we're building here together. The hashtags for the festival are hashtag OEFF 2022 and hashtag Turn the Tide. And now I'd like to turn it over to our facilitator to introduce themselves, the panelists, and our film.
Hi, I'm Amy Rosenthal. I'm the director of the Field Museum's Keller Science Action Center. That's an interdisciplinary team of scientists and educators who translate museum science and collections into results for environmental conservation and quality of life. I'm also proud to serve on the steering committee for the 250-member Alliance Chicago Wilderness and on the board of the Amazon Conservation Association. As One Earth's inimitable founder, Anna mentioned, many of this year's virtual events are accompanied by in-person Chicago area screenings. I want to take a moment to say hello to the folks joining us today from Chicago's Navy Pier. Welcome. Thanks for joining us today. We'll see you again after our feature film, The Pollinators. I look forward to that post-film moment for collective reflection. In today's world, we often watch movies and walk out of the theater or tumble into bed after Netflix without really reflecting on what we've learned and seen, how it makes us feel, and the implications it has for our lives. Through the One Earth Film Festival, we have the opportunity to take time and mental space to have a meaningful, thought-provoking dialogue sparked by the pollinators and enriched by truly expert, passionate panelists. Along with the film's director, our virtual panelists today are Annamaria Leon from Homan and the Chicago Permaculture Learning Institute, and Thad Smith from Westside Boyz. I look forward to your reflections and questions in the chat and in person at Navy Pier, and to exploring together ways that we can all take action for food access, food security, and saving pollinators. And now it's with admiration and appreciation that I want to turn it over to the director of the Pollinators, Peter Nelson, who will introduce his film. Welcome, Peter.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here. Really grateful for all of you showing up on a beautiful day. And I'm reaching you from the Hudson Valley of New York, which is the traditional lands of the Lenni Lenape peoples, and grateful for that. I hope you enjoy the film. It's a film that was made, literally started in our backyard. It's a backyard project, and it just grew into something very big. And I think there's something in there for everybody. And most importantly, there's something that we can do about the problem with insects and pollinators. So enjoy the film. One important note to make is that as you watch the film, what's happening right now in California, you'll see in the film, and it's the largest pollinator pollination event of managed bees in the world. And that's happening right now. It's approximately, this year, they're expecting 2.6 million hives to be moved out and placed in 1.3 million acres of almonds. So it's a giant monoculture of a food that we like to eat, but there's a lot of issues with that. So just think about that when you're watching it. We really hope you enjoy the film. And thanks again for coming. We'll see you after the film.
Well, now that I hope we're bringing in together our live and virtual audiences into one chat space, we're going to have a moment to reflect on what we just saw. So let us know, what are some of the scenes, the people, or lines in the film that stood out for you, and why? I'll say as things start coming in, it's always so powerful to see that footage of the bees and their wings flying and their legs moving. I mean, it becomes this, this creature with personality in a way that you don't usually see or get to think of as you're commuting to work or inside your home making dinner. And so that is something I really appreciated. And as we're thinking about it, one of the facts that really surprised me was that I had no idea that beehives moved about 22 times a year across the nation, and that has been happening since the 1950s or 60s. And it's only more recently using things like neonicotinoids that we're losing 30 to 40% of hives, or as much, I heard some folks say, as 50%. And it's stretching the use of all honeybees that exist, that we have in hives in the country in order to produce the food that we need. There was also mention of native bees like the rusty-patched bumblebee, which are endangered. So I am seeing from Navy Pier, some reflections are beekeepers seem to be moving the bees in daylight. We saw some of those images of trucks at nighttime too, when the bees were roosting. That may be a question we want to ask for our filmmaker. I'm seeing from Bethany, tragedy of bees due to greed. Questions from Navy Pier about daylight versus evening or nighttime movements. And 1 in 3 bites we take is dependent on pollination, says Jim Babcock. I hope you'll keep those reflections coming in, and we'll continue to incorporate those. And after your reflections, what is it that we saw, that we experienced, and that we're going to take with us? We'll be asking for your questions, like the ones that are beginning to come in into the chat. Because right now, I am honored to be joined by our panelists today. So I first want to bring on director and cinematographer Peter Nelson, who's been director of photography for the past 29 years and has a diverse body of work, including documentaries, feature films, and commercials. He's been a backyard beekeeper for 30 years, as well as a passionate gardener and outdoor enthusiast. The Pollinators is his debut feature film as director. Annamaria Leon is co-owner of Homan Grown L3C, a social enterprise focused on propagating urban durable perennials and creating regenerative, edible, and ornamental landscapes. A certified permaculture designer and teacher, she's co-founder of the Permaculture Chicago Teaching Institute, located in Chicago's West Side, North Lawndale neighborhood. Annamaria focuses her community organizing efforts through projects that reflect her love of greening and beautification. In addition, we have Thad Smith, founder and managing member of West Side Bee Boyz. Thad is a beecopreneur who has been a human in residence and beekeeper at Sweetwater Foundation on the south side of Chicago. There, he cares for the hives, provides training to team members and apprentices, and develops native beehives to enhance the urban ecology at the Commonwealth and enhances the weekly market with local honey. So please continue to add your questions to the chat and we'll bring those in as we go. I really look forward to fielding some questions from both our virtual and live audiences. As a first question, I want to ask Peter, Why did you make this film? What did you discover as you were making it?
Well, as you said, I'm a backyard beekeeper. I've been a beekeeper for decades, and so that's I was raised as sort of a free range kid, so I have a great love for the outdoors and nature. And I'm also a cinematographer. And I did a short film called Dance of the Honeybee, and I got a great response to it. And it kind of made me think about doing something longer. And I realized that people don't really have this knowledge of connection between bees and our food. And so I thought, well, you know what? That might be a good story that I could try and tell. And so that was pretty much the genesis of it. And it started off small and it just grew. And I found people were very much interested in it as we got into it. And it was just been beyond any expectation I had. It's just been wonderful, wonderful experience.
That's amazing. I hope and encourage audiences to see the short film as well, which I didn't know about. I'm going to look up. And maybe if there is access to it, folks can put it into the Vimeo chat. But now I want to ask Thad and Annamaria, what aspects of this film, The Pollinators, most resonate with the work that you do? And why did you want to be here today? Maybe I'll ask Thad to go first, followed by Annamaria. Thad, you're muted.
Okay, there we go. All right, I'm back on. Yeah. So what really resonated with me was the commercial beekeepers and then the regenerative farmers. That really showed the just how much of a stretch there is in beekeeping, how people look at beekeeping. It's really, I get the commercial beekeepers are trying to make money, but for me, commercial beekeepers are the bane of beekeeping industry. They just really are. But I get it. And then you see they were doing this since the 50s. And if you notice, native bees have been declined since the 50s, 90%. So when you look at it, it was a great film. It was awesome film. I loved it. I really did. But it pointed out to some of the things that I've really been talking about in my beekeeping. We need honeybees. We need native bees as well.
Oh, okay. For me, I'm a permaculture designer, which means permanent agriculture, permanent culture. And if you look at what fascinated me was just how the segregation of all the different crops, the animals off the land. And in permaculture design, we look at how we can design our ecosystem so that it's all connected, right? And the other part of it is really spreading the ethics of permaculture, which is first you take care of the land, and then you take care of your people, the people, and then you take care of your community, because there's so much abundance out there. Like you saw, there's an abundance out there. And it's always been that it isn't that we don't have enough food, it's the distribution of the food. And now it's become even a little bit more complex because of the way we segregate all of the different parts instead of integrating it. So for me, what really, when you asked me to come on this panel, I was excited to talk about how can you do this in your backyard, or in your communities, because we don't have a lot of opportunity individually to affect the broader agricultural issues, like the farm bill. We can always continue to work on that. And I think a lot of people have been working on that for a very long time. We've made some progress, but we can make quick progress in where we are right now. And I love that's what Peter said. Everybody can take action on this issue.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I found powerful. I hear you guys saying there's a holistic approach. We need working bees and we need native pollinators too. When we're thinking about what we put on the land, we're creating our own ecosystems or ecoscapes, and that matters. Then the people is part of that, and what the results are for all of us in our communities. I think that's a really powerful sentiment that really does come out in the film. I'm seeing a couple of questions come in through the chat. One is from Terry, and Terry asked, is making changes as a consumer really enough to compete with these government and enterprise or company priorities that seem to be poorly aligned with the kind of community and nature outcomes that we're talking about? I want to open it up to all of you, but maybe we'll start with Peter.
Yeah, I totally believe that. I think that we as consumers have so much power to ask questions, to vote with our dollars where we buy our food from. You know, when you're supporting a farmer's market or a CSA or a farmer down the road, you're really making a difference in your local economy, and you're making a difference in your own life in terms of health. And so I think that many small changes can make a huge impact. And I think that we are going to see that as a result when we step back and look at the changes that Annamaria is talking about with the changes and difficulties in food that happened during the pandemic, you know, in the food distribution. When you buy local, it really is about food security, you know, and making those choices, reading the labels, asking the questions when you go to the supermarket or the farmer's market. And because these farmers always, in my experience, take a lot of pride in what they do, and they want to talk about what they do. And so they get a kick out of and enjoy having an interaction with the customers because it makes it real for them. They want to grow food for us. And so getting that feedback and having that relationship is super important. So I totally believe that.
Annamaria, sorry, Thad. I wanted to ask Annamaria to follow up and combine with something. We're getting a lot of questions from our audience live at Navy Pier as to what is regenerative agriculture? How does it relate to permaculture? And what does it mean for consumer choices? And then I'll turn to you, Thad.
You know, when you look at our soil, it is the first 18 inches of our soil is what keeps us alive. So we owe our life to this soil. We kind of sometimes think, well, we're just going to keep adding plants, like what they were talking about, the cover crops. But actually what they're doing is they're feeding the soil. So regenerative agriculture starts with the micro herds in the soil. And even as I say that, you can see that we're still looking at the environment as if they are in service to us, a micro herd. You know, all the microorganisms, there's like this whole carbon economy that happens underground that many people don't understand. And so once we understand that we owe our lives, everything that we are to the soil, I mean, all of the elements that are in our body come from the soil. And if you look at our chemical makeup, it's the same as the soil. So when our soils are poor, our bodies are poor. So regenerative agriculture, that's what it's about, taking care of the soil first and foremost, and then feeding that, and the soil will feed us. So that means don't allow the soil to get solarized. You know, you add these different layers in regenerative agriculture. It's not just the tree and monocrop. You have 8 layers, you know, sometimes 10, 11 layers in tropical forests, in the tropical areas. Why is that? Because we're trying to save those microherds from erosion, from wind and water. We can do that in our backyards.
And Annamaria, how do consumers know if they're getting regenerative agriculture produced products or not? What should they look for?
It's difficult right now to do that. I mean, you know, you still have the organic label, but even organic is kind of getting mission creep a little bit. So I would say going to your local farmer, you could still look at the OMRI label. That's still better than conventional, right? But just knowing who's your farmer is really a great start.
Yeah, and that's where I want to turn it over to Thad, because one of the things that's been brought up in the chat by Jody at Navy Pier is 100% of working bees, honeybees, are needed for almonds right now when we're thinking about national agriculture production. And I know you think a lot about native bees and local bees. I'm wondering, Thad, if you could tell us about other important pollinators locally and how consumers can think about what they're purchasing and what they're using. Especially given the context of what's needed, the working bees nationally, and kind of other options locally.
Yeah, sure. So when I got into beekeeping, I had no clue that literally 3/4 of the bees in the United States go to California around this time to pollinate almonds. It blew my mind. And people have to realize that's like taking 3/4 of all the cows in America and to California and getting all the milk at one point in time. You have to remember that when you transport, like with commercial pollinators, they transport bees, which means that it's a livestock, which means that you have to feed them. And so they feed them fructose syrup, which is not good for you. It changes the physiology of the bee. And then, of course, livestock is going to die. So you're always having dying bees. And then when you get 3/4 of the bees in California together, somebody's sick. So it's like a child getting sick. So now you take all these bees, you get them together, half of them are going to be sick when they come back out into the real world. So that's really one of my main things. One of the things also is if you really want to control dollars, if you really want to make these people listen to you, go to your local farmer. Just buy at your local farmer at all times because you know it's fresh. Local farmers I'm telling you, they grow food all year long, especially here in Chicago. We have such wonderful farmers here in Chicago. And so when I look at these farms, they don't use pesticides. They don't do any of those things. And so you see a lot of native bees there because they grow different kind of crops. Honeybees they like the clover, but when you have other flowering plants, you have the mason bees come in, leafcutter bees, the carpenter bee, you have moths, butterflies, birds, bats, squirrels. I mean, these are the pollinators in the world that people don't know about. And so what I see when I see a garden, if I see a praying mantis, that means that you have a wonderfully eco-friendly yard, because a praying mantis is the king of all insects in the yard. And so when I see that, I know that you have just a fantastic yard. It's fantastic. But like I said, if you want to control what goes on with your food, buy local. And then your stores will notice that, and then they will start to have the things locally for you. That's how you control it. Money is king out here.
Yeah, I hear you guys all making this powerful case for why consumer choices do matter, and they start to change the things, the marketing, company level decisions, and governments and policy. One of the things that folks are asking about related to those consumer questions are twofold. One is, how does this relate to food waste? We understand like 40% of food is what's quoted by Jordan in the chat, is thrown into a landfill. Is that right? And how do you think of that in relation to these working and native pollinators? And then second is a follow-up around that. What about some folks really don't have the resources to buy something that costs more, even if it is local or organic? What do you encourage them to do? So one, food waste, and two, what do you encourage folks on with real considerations about their pocketbooks? What should they consider? And I'll take Annamaria and then Thad.
This is a really good question, because we do overplant, right? And what if we took all of that, the land where we could start to reforest it, and make maybe food forests. And if we could cut down that food waste by 20%, and that would free up a lot of land. That's one thing. I think another thing is how in your own community, like for example, right now in North Lawndale, we have a farm on Ogden, which is run by the Windy City Harvest Chicago Botanic Garden. Awesome enterprise. So we educate our local people, we grow things in aquaponics, and so we purchase these aquaponic lettuce, but they also have a grocery store that has organic produce, which they get from local farmers as much as possible. And local now means within 100 miles, okay? Not 1,500, but within 100 miles. And then all that food that doesn't get sold in that week, we bring it first to the caterers. In the local caterers, we donate it to them. The ends of these greens that get cut, we're now creating another connection with either a chicken farm or a goat farm so that they can have that. And we're also wanting to, with resources recycling. So we now are getting all of that into land, not landfills, but composting facilities. So it's about all the connections that you can create in your community. Like how many times can you use that water over and over? How many times can that food that we have be used over and over? And it all ends up as compost, but we also have to know that that's not soil. So there's all this integration that we could have power over in our own communities. And I think it's a good idea to sit down with your community and look at where are all these pockets of opportunities available.
What are your thoughts on these questions, pocketbook, and also what we were talking about before, please?
So, like with your pocketbook, if you're going to your local farmer, everybody, when you deal with somebody one-on-one on a regular basis, you know their situation, they know your situation. That's what it used to be. You could barter your food. Hey, you may have a skill that this farmer needs at some point in time, but he has goods that you need. That's really where you can really become truly a community activist, where you're actually working with your farmer. You're actually understanding what they do and they understand what you do. And now you can barter whatever you need. You can take money out of the equation at that point in time when it becomes truly local and truly dealing with it's like back in the day, you had your egg farmer, you had your milk guy. Everybody made personal connections. And that's really what farming and food is all about. Making these personal connections all through your life. And like Annamaria said, so we go with the food. So with the food waste, half that food is ugly food. That's all that is. It's not real, like the perfect food. It's the ugly food. So eat more ugly food. It tastes the same. It's going to be the same. If you chop it up, it's all the same. So buy more ugly food. That will help with food waste. Go if you want soil, go to your local compost place where they have worms. These are things where you truly interconnect yourself with your community that now you know what's going on. Now you're in touch with many, many people in the society. You have personal connections. And now it's not a thing about money anymore. It's about what can I do for you and what can you do for me to get back to the old time way where you bartered with everything you did. It's not about money. It's about, hey, how can I help you? How can you help me? How can we grow each other? And how can we both win in this particular situation?
Can I also add, Amy, that one other thing that we can look at is inside of permaculture design, you start wherever you are, right? So let's say if you have access to land, for example, in my backyard, I planted all these fruit trees. Then my neighbor planted her fruit trees. Then she purchased a vacant lot. I didn't have that money. She did, which we created into a food forest. And then we networked out into the churches. And then, the people who are renters, they are able to get food from the church gardens, from the community gardens. And now we created a free store. We have the Love Fridge movement right now, which is amazing in Chicago. It's 24/7 access to food, refrigerated, that people just come and they leave food in these refrigerators. Sometimes I see these refrigerators, they're emptied 2-3 times a day. I mean, there is a real need for people. I just saw an article in Block Club Chicago where they also have a free store where people are putting in not just food, but clothing. What do they call these things, like for shampoo and hair, just essentials. And this was how it used to be. We have the Facebook marketplace. You can barter. There's all kinds of upcycle, recycle. So there is lots of ways to reduce how much income we put out in things that are an abundance.
Thank you both very much for that, for your recommendations for what folks can access, what resources there are when we know that a lot of the local foods or organic sometimes have a premium associated with them, benefiting the farmers who choose to make those nature-based decisions, but making it harder for everyone to access healthier, nature-positive foods. And so community fridges, community gardens, I heard are some of the options. That I loved your recommendation. Eat ugly food. And with that, I wanted to turn it to you, Peter, about some of the things you've been thinking about as you've been talking about this film associated with food waste and associated with what the healthy options are to support our pollinators that consumers can make. But I also wanted you to speak to that question we had in our reflection. We saw kind of daytime and nighttime scenes with movement of bees. When does that happen? Is it happening at both times of day? What did you find while you were making this film?
Yeah, well, just to answer the food thing, I mean, my first stop in our local supermarket is the sale rack of out of date produce, because it always leads to something interesting, maybe unexpected for dinner that night. And I love that idea of using the ugly fruit. So food waste is something I totally agree with Annamaria about the composting, and a lot of farmers now here have compost sidelines, because they need it to enhance their soil and bring it back. So that resource is really a growing element in pretty much cultures across the country. So I think it's a great option. And with regards to the bees being moved, I mean, honeybees are kind of unique in the bee world, is that they are movable to some extent because they come back to their hive, which is an artificial construct of the way honeybees naturally live. But they go into the hive, and once they're there, you can move them at night. And so in the morning, when a honeybee comes out, it orients itself to the sun to figure out where it is, and then it'll go about foraging for the day and then come back to that hive at the end of the day. So that's why the beekeepers move them typically at night. But bees are also weather dependent, and they're cold temperature dependent. And so if it's a cold morning, they won't necessarily be flying. Honeybees anyway. Some of the native bees fly when it's a little bit colder than 50 degrees, but the honeybees don't. And so they move them. So a lot of those shots of during the day were either very early in the morning or towards the end of the day when the bees were getting loaded up or unloaded. And some of you couldn't tell the temperature from the film, but some of those were early May, early March in California, and those days were pretty cold. And one thing I want to stress just about the beekeepers that are moving these bees is that they're not considered pets, right? And they are considered livestock. But having said that, these beekeepers, at least all the ones that I met, really care about the bees, and they work really hard to take care of them and treat them well. And when they drive from Florida or Georgia out to California or back and go to New York or Maine or whatever, they typically will drive at night, and they usually don't stop. If they do stop, they stop at night where the bees stay in the hive, because it's not in their interest for the bees to show up dead when they get there. And so they really care. They plan their routes based on the weather, the temperature, and everything else. So they really take care of them. And the other thing about the movement of bees is that these beekeepers have really responded to the changes in agriculture. As we've gone to more monoculture farming, there are less opportunities for pollination because there isn't a food. So it's all this diversity of bloom throughout a year. So farmers are requested, and as their farms have expanded into one single crop, they've requested these beekeepers come in to do that pollination. So they're really responding to the changes in our agricultural system away from a diversified farm into a more monoculture farming, because, hey, it's simpler if you're a farmer to farm one thing during a year.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I have one more question for each of you before we turn to action. So I'm going to start those around. Peter, I think I'm going to start with you, if that's okay, because there's a burning question from Janice Ginsler, who says, from the film, I saw them spraying something on the bees. Then we learned that it's smoke. Why smoke? Did they say to make the bee sexier?
No, it's the smoke. It calms the bees. Essentially, they think that there's a fire going on. So what they do is they gorge themselves with honey for one thing, as if they have to take flight, and so it makes it a little harder for them to sting. But it also blocks the sting pheromone. When a bee stings you, it will leave a barb and leave a pheromone, a little venom sac that releases a pheromone that tells the other bees, hey, that's where the problem is. And honeybees don't want to sting because they die in the process, unlike a wasp or a hornet that can sting multiple times. So the smoke really blocks that sting pheromone, as well as making the bees think, oh, there's a problem over here. And so they try and correct it.
Thank you for answering that one. We all wanted to know. My next question is for Annamaria. And so we've gotten from a few folks in the chat the question about the importance of community gardens for providing local food, wanting you to speak a little bit more to that, but then a complementary question that came in: what can people do who don't have access to gardens or land, what should they be doing to support pollinators? So benefits of community gardens, and if you don't have one, what should you do?
Well, first of all, a lot of community gardens are really great because many of us who don't have access to land are in survival mode. And so we work all the time. We don't have, it's sometimes gardening is considered a luxury. So if you have access to a community garden, supporting them, if you yourself cannot garden, you could donate to them or give time to weeding or watering, because that it's a lot of time and effort to keep up a garden. It's not just planting the seeds, it's the weeding, it's the watering, it's the composting, it's the moving of this, it's the topsoil, so it's a big deal. Any time that you can give to a community garden is great. And what was the second question? If you don't have access to it, if you can, if you do know somebody who has land, and help them plant native plants or any type of plant, and also understand what is the design that's required to have a very low maintenance garden. The other issue that we have in the city is we don't have access to water. So even as beautiful as you want to have a garden, if you don't have access to water, the garden won't be successful. So there are plants that are native, that are drought tolerant, that don't need a lot of care. And we also need to educate ourselves and our neighbors on what is beautiful. Like this behind me, this is from my garden in Douglas and Homan in North Lawndale. But many people think it's like a weed patch because we don't yet have the ability, we haven't cultivated our ability to be still and to look at what is beauty. It isn't just all geraniums and all green grass, that's a green desert out there. Nature looks like this. It looks like you, behind you, Amy. So, yeah, having to change what we think is beautiful.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. One of the things that I think about too, when if folks don't have access to a land-based garden like the one behind me, we at the Field Museum run a monarch community science project. Monarch butterflies is one of the pollinators that comes through the Chicago region in their Midwest Flyway. And we have found that folks who participate in this sometimes will have a single pot of milkweed plants on the 11th, the 14th floor of a high rise, and they will still get monarchs and then monarch caterpillars and can participate in saving this species that is likely to be listed or will be listed soon. So it's pretty incredible the ways that you can engage in supporting pollinators. And in fact, Thad, I wanted to ask you this question that came in from Jay in the chat about, are there common vegetable plants or others that are more beneficial for bees? And also, I think there's this range of bees and native pollinators. I talked about the monarch butterfly, but I think you have some stories about important pollinators here in Illinois that folks might not know.
Yeah, so, when it comes to bees, any pollinator, it's all about the diversity. So whatever you plant, somebody's going to pollinate that plant. So I would say, make sure if you plant something, you have a good companion plant with it. That's really when you're talking, you just can't plant anything in your garden. Like if you plant an apple tree, you plant a similar apple tree to it because it helps. I don't understand the science. Annamaria could be a little bit more sciencey about that, but yeah, you need companion plants, and those companion plants help with the bugs. They take away from both the plants. So that's the other thing. Also, we had talked about pollinators. There's one thing we didn't mention, that there's the rusty patch bumblebee, which is on the endangered species list. And when you look at its range, it has a very small range here in the city of Chicago, which I really didn't know about. That was really super cool. It's on the north side, and it just shows how, what I love about Chicago is we have plants. And I think with the Chicago Park District and a lot of the other organizations, they don't use a lot of pesticides. They just let the stuff grow. They really do. And I think that does help out a lot. I think if you want to understand how the land has changed, back in my day, there used to be thousands and thousands of lightning bugs outside. I mean, every kid could go outside and catch 1,000 lightning bugs, and you wouldn't even put a dent in the lightning bug population. Now you rarely see them in the world today. That is a true, I'm 56. So in 40 years, that is a true change that I saw on my own. It's amazing if you really take a look at that. Then the other thing is there's a bee here, squash bee. Is responsible. So if you buy a pumpkin here in the United States, it's an 85% chance that it came from Illinois. We are the largest pumpkin distributors in the world, in the United States. And what happens is that everybody thinks the honeybee pollinates that. The honeybee wasn't even here when we were growing squash and gourd. When the Indians, the true natives of this land, they were being pollinated by a squash bee. They're still pollinated by the squash bee, and it's responsible for billions of dollars of industry here in Illinois, and we really don't even know about it. But also, we got to remember that these squash bees live in the ground, and they are directly affected. Squash bees and lightning bugs live in the ground, and so that they are directly affected by the pesticides that are being put in the ground. So it's important that we, again, take care of the soil, take care of the land.
Yeah, the squash bee that's incredible to learn about, and the fact that there are things that we can do. We're going to turn to action right now. You know, the National Youth Poet Laureate of the United States, Amanda Gorman, called us to action in her poem Earthrise. She says, "There is no rehearsal. The time is now, now, now. Earth, pale blue dot, we will fail you not." Annamaria, Peter, and Thad, I'd like to ask each of you to please share some ideas for what actions people can take to be part of the solution for working in native pollinators. Can you suggest actions anyone can take and actions that organizations, governments, or companies can and should be taking now? Annamaria, can we hear from you first?
I would say for the bigger corporations that have acres and acres of land out there that are just really, it's just grass. Convert 50% of these land holdings that you have around your corporate campuses into prairies, or give that land to local farmers who would be able to have access to water and lease it to them. That way we can also have local farming. And as a homeowner, if you have grass, keep as much grass as you want and turn that grass into another pollinator area. You could read about this book. It's called Bringing Nature Home. I don't know if you can see this. It's in my, I can't see it, but it's from Doug Tallamy. He's talking about homegrown parks. And anything you plant, just plant different colors with different structures of plants in your garden, and you will make a huge difference. And then support your local farmers.
Thank you. Peter, can we hear from you next?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks. There's so many things that people can do, and what Annamaria was talking about, and you were talking about, Amy, with these pollinators and the monarchs, and having weeds behind you. And to me, I always say a weed is a plant with a PR problem, right? So it serves some purpose out there, and animals, insects are going to take advantage of it. So if people can sort of reframe the way they look at plants and look at their environment, I think that's a huge step in getting it better. And with the monarchs up on the 11th floor or whatever, many of the native bees have a very short range, a few hundred feet sometimes. And so having a mosaic of flowering plants and resources and habitat for them throughout an urban area in particular is really important, because they will come back if we give them a place to go and live and eat and survive safely. So I think, and the big takeaway for me, I think that people can do is ask questions. I think that's the power that we all have. Start a dialogue with your farmers, with your beekeepers. Buy local honey. It's a huge thing, and you're making a connection with people in your community and learning something. I learn something every time I go out into my beehives, and every time I go outside, I see something on the way that sparks my curiosity. And so I have that. Engage that curious nature that we all have about the environment around us, and connect with our food and where it came from is really important. And that's is my kind of big takeaway for this.
I love that. So here's Bringing Nature Home by Doug Tallamy, one of the things you can use, but also grab your local weeds and give them a marketing plan, says Peter Nelson. Thad, what can we do to be part of the solution?
Well, speaking about Peter, when you look at clover, clover's a weed and the bees love it. Like you said, it just, they just need a new marketing plan. So really the things I think we can do is, if you own a home and you have grass, convert some of that grass into pollinating plants, flowers, trees, and or food. That's the first thing. I mean, to get with some people in your neighborhood, and then you all can, as a community, garden here. Now, any food that you get there, you can share in the community. Now your block becomes not just people living on the block, but people who actually enjoy each other, actually can come together on certain days and have barbecues. Then maybe it might inspire somebody else in your block. Hey, I'll grow this, you grow that, I grow this. And then now you can then help the people on your block, inspire the kids. They learn about nature. They become more hip to conservation. You have starting it young. Other thing, join a club, gardening club, beekeeping club, anything with the environment, something that you can get around other people and other people can talk about what you can do instead of just sitting around and saying what I can do. Get with others who want to do the same things you do. And the more you get together, the bigger the action that you can make and the bigger impact you can have. Last thing, always go to a farmer's market. Always, always, always. When they're in season, don't go anywhere else but a farmer's market to get all your fresh produce. Most of the farmers come from Michigan, anywhere with about 200, 250 miles. Here in Illinois, try and look at some of your local farms, especially here in Chicago. There's the farm that I really like is Sweetwater Foundation on the south side. To me, that is the ultimate merging of bees, native bees, honeybees. When you look at it, there's hawks, chickens. We have so many different types of species on this land that you wouldn't even know about, and it's tucked in on the south side of Chicago. So support them so they can give you more. Again, take classes, get around others, and then plant some plants and flowers in your backyard.
Thank you guys so much. This has really been an enlightening discussion, riveting. I learned a lot. So my thanks to each of our incredible panelists, Peter, Thad, and Annamaria, for giving so generously of your time, your wisdom, and your stories. You've given us a lot to think about and ideas for what we should do next. I want to turn to that slide that was up to summarize some of the actions that have been submitted by our panelists and our action partners. There are many ways we can all take action. Cultivate habitat for pollinators, plant a garden or a window box or something on your 11th floor balcony. Eschew chemical pesticides. Take action for pollinators with the Xerxes Society, for example, including our native endangered rusty patch bumblebee. Buy local honey. In the coming days, we'll email you these take action points, as well as a recording of this discussion and a transcript of the chat with ideas and resources that were shared too. So please share. On the next slide, I hope you felt called toward One Earth's 11th year theme of turning the tide. As we close out, please share in the chat ways you're ready to join in turning the tide on our climate crisis. Hashtag turn the tide. What do you feel compelled to do as a result of this event? So as I look in here, I can see folks recommending organizations in Chicago that are active in the space, Blacks in Green, for example. Ideas for gardening at home, joining a gardening or a beekeeping club, patronizing farmers markets for fresh produce whenever they're available. How else will you turn the tide? We just heard about the power of consumer decisions. What you decide to purchase changes not only your own health, that of your household, it can change your community if you get together and make decisions about what you're going to produce, what you're going to garden, acquire land together, or help out in that community garden. But also going and getting those ugly foods we heard about Getting things that are local products really matters. And those are the market signals that change the way your supermarkets and your producers are going to behave, and can also help to change policies if you tell your representatives that this is what matters to you. So, native bees and other actions are the things that I'm hearing from the crowd as we're closing out this session. I just want to say this has been an inspiring audience, a first for me with a hybrid. I was 2 years ago, the first One Earth Film Festival event that went virtual. We didn't know that on the day what we were going to do as the pandemic became closer and closer to home. But today we have folks who are coming in from all around the country and around the world, as well as our live audience at Navy Pier, having these experiences that bring us together. It's an inspiring audience. So thank you. May you find joy in the striving. And as you do, to learn more about our panelists and stay in touch with their work, you can see the links on this slide that's up. You can remember to tweet, post, or share what you just experienced online and on social media. If you found value in today's event, donate to One Earth Film Fest and join us again this week during Earth Week in April and throughout the year for other events and activities. Our thanks, mine and that from everyone at OEFF, to each and every one of you for being here, for participating. Give yourself a virtual or live round of applause. Good afternoon, and thank all of you.